Gaming Bolt presents 15 video games that shockingly lacked a proper final boss. You vanquished the creatures of the night, prevented a secret society from enslaving humanity, and barely averted nuclear war from breaking out worldwide. Congratulations never feels quite earned, however, until you've taken down the big bad responsible for the entire ordeal. The final boss fight has been a staple ever since video games began to have endings at all, with King Koopa holding the princess in another castle. But with games pushing into new and exciting narrative territory, we're seeing more titles go without that climactic final set piece. Or at least the final set pieces they do offer aren't against a singular antagonist, as is tradition. Spoilers ahead, but please do share your favorites in the comment section below. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. While the mid-game confrontation against Metal Gear Sahelanthropus is an epic battle across Afghanistan against a giant mech in kooky Kojima fashion, there is, after all, over half of the game to go once Venom Snake and his Diamond Dogs take down the machinations of Skullface and his strange vendetta against English. Chapter 2 conversely doesn't quite have the same impact when you face down a few larger conflicts at seemingly random points in a casual playthrough. The ending of the game sends our heads spinning for different reasons, but the lack of those amazing Kojima final bosses makes us wonder if Hideo really was the man who sold the world. Mass Effect 3. When gamers think of disappointment, it turns out that some of them spell it BioWare. The long-awaited conclusion not only to Mass Effect 3, but a generation-long sci-fi epic that players had been investing themselves in for many years should have had the gravity of the suicide mission, with the stakes being ramped up to 11 as you take down the leader of the Reapers. Instead, players are asked what flavor of ice cream death they would like to serve the universe, undermining the choices of players through all of those years. The Last of Us. One truism of most zombie fiction is that the real monsters are people. Joel doesn't save a village of survivors from being overrun to cap off the countrywide journey he took with young Ellie in the hopes of saving mankind with her immunity. The Last of Us resonates in those last few moments with Joel, the man who has lost so much since the outbreak, fighting to hold on to the one person who was able to give him a little bit of humanity. Even knowing how terrible the act is, we still pull the trigger against unarmed doctors to save her. We hate Joel for what he does, but we understand it all the same. WOLFENSTEIN 2: The New Colossus. It's hard to really make a case that WOLFENSTEIN 2: The New Colossus not ending with a boss fight leaves it lacking in over-the-top set pieces. It is, after all, the kind of game that only Bethesda would make, taking the concept of a Nazi-controlled world and running so far as to find you shooting goose-stepping power-armored soldiers on Venus. The fight to get the drop on the terrible General Engel is no cakewalk, but the quiet moment of powerlessness and call for hope that follows shortly afterwards leaves players with a lasting impression of having made waves against the biggest villains the world has ever known. Red Dead Redemption. Throughout Red Dead Redemption, John Marston is trying to lead a simple life and live off of the land, leaving his former life of crime behind and being a better man than circumstances allowed him to be earlier. The power in the ending of Red Dead Redemption then doesn't come from the triumph of Marston completing the journey and getting his happily ever after. Instead, as the true antagonists of the game have been doing all along, Marston is disposed of and robbed of the quiet life the government officials like Ross promised him for returning to his old ways. His son coming around many years later to take out Ross in turn really hammers in the theme of the game. We must all pay for our sins. Grand Theft Auto 5. In stark contrast to the flawed protagonist of Red Dead Redemption being completely unable to escape the fate of an unjust system, Grand Theft Auto 5 puts the player characters of Michael, Trevor, and Franklin into an impossible-to-win situation that leads to 3 drastically different endings. The situations that follow either see Trevor or Michael die, having been set up by their contacts at the FBI in Merryweather, unless the player is just crazy enough to fight them both and make it out with all 3. The different ways that the game allows the fantastic interplay between the protagonists to shake out fantastically uses the full strengths of the game. Rage. While the original Rage held a lot of promise as the next shooter evolution from the wizards who gave rise to the genre in the first place, id Software Shooter didn't really have a lot beyond that decent shooting core to carry the game. The player wakes up to a ruined world and is given a bunch of exposition dumps about the tepidly named Authority who has the world on lockdown. For some reason, not choosing to set the story during an interesting time when the player finally fights off a handful of enemies and activates a satellite to raise a sleeping army for the resistance, many were surprised to see the credits start to roll. Let's all hope Rage 2 fixes this problem. Bulletstorm. While everybody knows about the genre-defining action titles from the geniuses at Platinum Games such as Bayonetta, they are far from the only people doing games where style matters, and how cool you look doing it mattered as much as the fact that you got the objective complete. People Can Fly took that kind of idea into a first-person shooter with Bulletstorm's over-the-top kill score system and strange sense of humor. Unfortunately, what they didn't carry over was the over-the-top bosses that matched the potty-mouthed protagonists. Instead of having you take down some kind of gigantic super mutant, players take on a few firefights against heavy troopers before finally breaking through to Serrano, who dies rather disappointingly through QTEs before an escape sequence. Mirror's Edge. Faith Connors was never quite the fighting type in Mirror's Edge, where the best plan was usually to run away from danger instead of engaging. Thankfully, DICE didn't try to force that upon players for the sake of a climax, choosing to challenge players on their dexterity and ability to path out a route and execute on the series of hardcore parkour that was needed to get through. Kicking the big bad out of a chopper just before the credits is a formality more than anything. Mercenaries 2: World in Flames. A product of a time when Just Cause and GTA weren't so hopelessly in front of anything trying to be like them that nobody bothered. Mercenaries 2: World in Flames granted players a world and asked them how they would like to burn it down. Much like its contemporaries, however, there was less consideration given to the story and missions than having an exciting playground. The final mission of the game doesn't even have you storming a base and can be completed without firing a single shot after an airstrike knocks down Solano's bunker and you catch up to his helicopter to put him down via a QTE sequence. Batman Arkham Knight. For everything that Rocksteady did right during the creation of their Batman Arkham trilogy, setting the groundwork for amazing titles to follow like Marvel's Spider-Man, they never quite did manage to have a worthy final boss. Arkham Knight in turn decided to eschew the idea completely, wrapping up the story of the Batman with a brief scripted sequence inside of Bruce's head after he's backed into a corner by Scarecrow. Still, it's a more fitting end than Roid Rage Joker. The Order 1886. Ready at Dawn's experiment with the Order 1886's cyber steampunk core of Lycan battling Men in Black of London action game. The cinematic experience unfortunately left the game with a runtime about as long as a new Avengers movie, and the final battle against Lucian's werewolf form happening nearly completely within QTE. Disappointing enough on its own without the poorly explained sequel bait that followed, leaving players feeling burned. A Way Out. When Leo and Vincent meet in prison as strangers, it's hard to see right away how it will all go horribly wrong by the end, with the revelation that Vincent was an undercover cop, playing the long con against Leo the entire time. A Way Out doesn't end with a traditional boss battle because the game chooses to leverage the co-op experience, with that upending the status quo, and pits player against player and friend against friend in a way that might be predictable, but nonetheless effective when you're forced to put a bullet into the chest of the friend you experienced everything with since prison. Fable 2. It's hardly the first time we've discussed the ending of Fable 2. An elongated sequence of scenes that barely connect sees you facing the villain Lucian at the top of the spire, enacting a ritual which you stop with a music box, also unexplained. Even if the player tries to wait out the evil rant of Lucian, one of the other heroes will take the single shot it takes to finish him. It's a bad taste all around that you're left with, magnified by a terrible choice offered to the player. Obviously, the dog is the only right answer. Assassin's Creed 3. While it was long overdue for Ubisoft's now iconic open-world series Assassin's Creed to move beyond the Italian protagonist that headlined for 3 games now, Connor's journey through Assassin's Creed 3 was far less memorable for many reasons. While Assassin's Creed 2 ended with an underwhelming fistfight against an old man, it was, at least, a fight. The chase against Charles Lee ends with him getting away, and then Connor following him to a bar where the two enemies share a drink, before the knife is plunged in. Not even through QTE, but through cutscene. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.